So we will start very soon. So before that, reminder, we have interpretation arranged for Bahasa Indonesia, Khmer, Thai, Tagalog, Tamil, and Hindi. For Tagalog, please choose Spanish for Tagalog interpretation. For Hindi, please choose German channel. Thank you very much. So Raina, I hand over to you, and Saleha, I hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Fish. Thank you. I think we can officially begin. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for wherever everybody's joining in from. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this crucial discussion on caring for caregivers, uniting for change in Asia. Today's event, which is hosted by the International Domestic Workers Federation and Oxfam, it aims to shed a light on the vital role of care work and gender equality in Asia. So as we know, women and girls globally make up 2/3 of the paid care workforce. They bear a disproportionate care responsibility. This inequality perpetuates economic disparities. It limits their participation in various spheres, trapping them in cycles of time and income poverty. COVID-19 has also intensified this issue, highlighting the fragility of our current care system, exposing the link between women's unequal share of unpaid care work and their overrepresentation in low paid and also in precarious roles. So this crisis, it emphasized the need for us to rethink our system, guaranteeing a right to care and dignified working condition, and also sharing responsibilities among the state, private sector, families, and also communities. This looming challenges posed by the aging population, cuts in public spending, and also climate change, they threaten to exacerbate the gender and economic inequalities and create this spiraling crisis for care and caregivers. And here today, and at Oxfam, as a global organization, has been actively engaged in addressing the heavy and unequal burden of unpaid and underpaid care work. We had a Time to Care report which highlighted the immense yet often undervalued contribution of women and girls in care work. And it's estimated that this work adds to at least 10.8 trillion to the economy, $10.8 million to the economy. And it emphasized the need for the urgent change in recognizing and valuing this labor. And our partnership with the National Domestic Workers Federation has been pivotal in advocating for caregiver support, from the social protection to addressing gender pay gap. We strongly believe that caregivers' voices must drive decision-making in labor and care policies. And this webinar is a culmination of the efforts to present findings from a research that we did together. It's called a care mapping research, which was conducted across 8 different Asian countries. And we're here to share these crucial insights and engage in a panel discussion, which is led by distinguished experts in the field of care work. Just to go over the event agenda a bit, and also let me just tell you about some housekeeping rules that we have. So throughout the event, we encourage active participation. Feel free to use the chat function for any queries or comments that you have during the presentation or during the panel discussion. And following the panel discussion, we have a dedicated Q&A session. So in case any of you have any questions, please add them to the chat, and our moderator will pose them to the panelists. Also, I would also like to maintain a respectful environment during this discussion. We value all opinions and encourage an open dialogue, and also to ensure the smooth running of this event, kindly keep your microphones muted when not speaking to just to minimize the background noise. So if any of you and the speakers especially encountering technical issues, our team is available for assistance. Please use the chat function if you need help. I thank each and one of you for joining us today. Your presence is invaluable, and as we collectively advocate for fair working conditions and gender equality in the care sector. So let's engage in the significant conversations and work towards positive change. Thank you. I believe I am now going to invite International Domestic Workers Federation to come on the panel stage. I'd like to invite Justine Lam and Rania Bhattacharya to start off with the presentation to welcome us all. I'll hand over to you, Rania.
Thank you. Thank you, Saleha. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone here. I'm Rena, and I'm from IDWF, and I'm based out of Assam in India. Today, actually, we are very glad to be able to present to you the results of the Asia Care Policy Mapping that IDWF has been working on and carried out in the past few months with the support of Oxfam. Today, in this event, we have with us domestic workers and domestic worker leaders from across Asia and friends and allies of IDWF from across the world who have joined. And we will have the pleasure of hearing some of them speak today. For those of you who may not know IDWF, we are a membership-based global organization of domestic and household workers, and we strongly advocate for the rights of domestic workers globally. To give you a little bit of background, in our 2018 Congress that happened of IDWF that happened at Cape Town, South Africa, the IDWF during that time had declared to work towards the recognition of domestic work as care work. And in our 2023 Congress that happened in The Hague in Belgium, this resolve was strengthened by also ensuring that we have our presence in decision-making forums and advocacy spaces related to care. We want to stress on the fact that domestic work is care work, that domestic workers form a major portion and a major workforce within the care economy, and therefore have a right to decent working conditions and social security and social protection. This study was therefore, the study that we commissioned was therefore carried out so that we can make these assertions with the backing of data. And for this, we actually looked at data from 8 countries: Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, and Bangladesh. We onboarded a lead researcher to compile the studies at the country level, along with respective country researchers at all of these countries, as well as trying to identify what trends are present at the regional level. It is therefore my pleasure to introduce to you Justine Lam, our lead researcher for the project, who shall now be talking about some of the results and findings that we came across while doing this particular study. So Justine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rena. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Justine, and I'm based in Hong Kong. I've had a real pleasure working on this project together very closely with the IDWF staff, including Rena. I've been working with her for months, and I think some of the national researchers that I had the pleasure working with are also in the audience. So their work allowed me to really put together all the findings from the 8 countries that we looked at. And I'm very happy today to be able to share these findings with you. As you know, we're looking at 8 countries, so the amount of information is enormous. So I'm not going to overwhelm everyone with like all the detailed findings, but maybe to share some of the trends and observations that come from the research that we've put together. So let me first share my slides.
Justine, do you want me to share?
Yeah, maybe that would be better. So I'm having some trouble with the sharing here.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me first repeat again the 8 countries that we've looked at in Asia. So we have Bangladesh, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia. And a very big focus of the research is to look at domestic workers' role in providing care for the population in these 8 countries and in the region in general. And so some key questions that we have in mind when we're working on this project was first, really, what are the care policies in the region, and whether they are sufficient or inadequate to address the needs in the region. Sorry, Fish, can we have the next slide? So we really want to look at whether the government is doing enough to address the care needs in this region, and accordingly, how are people attending to their care needs, and whether they are now turning a lot to informal care, like care provided by family members, the community or domestic workers, and also then how this is affecting the situation of domestic workers, especially given, as we all know, I think everyone here already knows that domestic workers work very long hours, they have like heavy workload, and why this is so. So let's first start with the trends that we can see from the region in terms of the care needs. It's basically across the board that life expectancy is increasing, birth rates are declining, and as a result, we're seeing all these 8 places are either aging or aged societies. Just a little bit of definition. Aging societies means when the population about 65 is reaching 7% or more, whereas for aged societies is 15% or more. And so we're seeing very clear aging trends, as we can see from the chart below. This is a chart trying to show the data that we've gathered from these 8 places in terms of the elderly population by the percentage of total population. Yeah, here we go. So the gray lines are the elderly population by the total population, but in terms of the percentage of the total population in recent years, around 2020 to 2022. Whereas the yellow is the projection for 2050. So these 8 countries, they have varying numbers of elderly population, with places like Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan having a much larger elderly population already now, whereas like the Philippines, Indonesia, or Bangladesh, they have a bigger children population right now. But then if we look closely at the chart here, for all these countries, the elderly population in terms of percentage is going to double by 2050. So the question is how the governments are preparing for the needs of this increasing elderly population across the board. So in the next slide, this is what we found from the research. So if we look at care policies as a spectrum, in terms of how governments approach the idea of care policies or introducing care policies to address the needs of the population, on the left-hand side, or on at the end of the left-hand side, we can see what South Korea calls the socialization of care. So I think that's really an exception in all the places that we've looked at. The South Korea government has been looking at care through the lens of socialization of care. And what that means is that they are trying to bring care into the public. So meaning that the government is going to shoulder more of the care responsibilities and to address the care needs of the population. On the right-hand side, on the other end of the spectrum, it's a much stronger policy preference for family and home care. And this is actually what's happening in most of the places that we have looked at. So you can see like 6 flags on the right-hand side. All these places, the governments are leaning towards having a much stronger preference for family and home care. And what that means in reality is that in practice is that the government thinks will introduce less policy to support the care needs of the population, because they think that this responsibility is for the family to deal with. And for the Philippines and Bangladesh specifically, it's actually written in the domestic laws and policies. So that's actually an interesting finding. And Taiwan is kind of in the middle. It has a bit less care policies than South Korea, but better than the other 6 countries. In the next slide, I will show you what that translates into in practical terms. So I mentioned South Korea follows the concept of socialization of care. And so they actually have universal long-term care and child care. And they also have the most comprehensive package of family-friendly labor and social policies out of these 8 countries. Taiwan is in the middle. They also have universal child care, but long-term care provided by the government covers roughly only 30% of the population. Whereas for all the rest of the countries that we have looked at, they have no universal long-term care or child care. So any public services will only benefit the people who are in the lowest income batch. And so public care services are also severely inadequate. So here you might wonder how inadequate that is. So I have here are some examples of some of the data that we've been able to identify. It's not like same data for each country, but these are some indications of how inadequate the care policies are in some of the places. So on the left-hand side, first one you can see in Malaysia, the public care facilities only cover around 0.4% of the older people with care needs. In terms of waiting times in Hong Kong, it could be around 2 to 3 years for subsidized care. And then in countries like the Philippines and Bangladesh, there are less than 10 public care facilities for elderly people across the entire country. So you can see how little the support is from the government. Another thing that we look at when we examine the care policies in these 8 countries is the availability of family-friendly policies. Is mostly absent, I would say, in the region, but South Korea is one of the best examples we have. Here we can see that they have all these family-friendly policies that I've shown on the screen, including maternity and paternity leave, parental leave, workplace child care policy, flexible work arrangements for not only working parents, but also the working population with any kinds of care needs at home. What's important is also family care leave, which is generally not available in all other places, and also cash benefits for family caregivers. Here you can see like 7 ticks of the in terms of the number of family-friendly policies they have in South Korea. But if you think about the numbers for most other places except Taiwan, Taiwan has 6. But for Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Bangladesh, and Thailand, they have around 1 to 4 of these family-friendly policies that South Korea has introduced for their people. And what that means is that for working population with care needs at home, there is not much in terms of public policy that would alleviate the responsibility that they are shouldering. And so the slide here is kind of a way of visualizing the situation in the region. In general, public care or public care services are not accessible to most people in the region. If you have money, then you can afford the expensive formal private care, like care provided in private nursing homes or institutions. But for the majority who are like low or middle income families, they are being pushed to rely on informal care, which would be provided either by family members, community volunteers, unpaid, or domestic workers who are generally paid very little and not enough to recognize their contribution and the skills and experience. We have also gathered some data on how much of the care work is being shared by domestic workers in the region. I think this is particularly important to show how much of the work domestic workers are doing to take care of the population in Asia. We do not generally have direct data showing the proportion of care work being shared by domestic workers. So some of these are deduced from the estimated number of domestic workers that we're able to identify from government statistics. So you can see that in terms of numbers, like Bangladesh, they have at least 1.3 million domestic workers. And so assuming one domestic worker only works for one household, they are serving at least 1.3 million households in Bangladesh. And so that's also how we came up with the numbers for like Indonesia, 4.5 million households, and some other countries. But whereas when there's data, say for Taiwan, domestic workers shoulder at least 30% of the population's care needs. Malaysia is here to show you that for some countries like Malaysia, there is simply no clear number on the domestic worker population, and there are also a large number of undocumented domestic workers, which made it difficult for us to even estimate how much of the care work is being shouldered by domestic workers in Malaysia. And then just some more data from Hong Kong, the Philippines, and South Korea and Thailand. You can see from the screen the numbers is not small. So I would say these data is supporting the fact that domestic workers are actually supporting millions of households in Asia. And so it is really important to bring the voices of domestic workers into the care agenda. And so moving on, now let's look at the situation of domestic workers in the region and whether there is enough to recognize their contribution and to provide enough protections. The analysis that we did in the report is based on the ILO 5R framework. So we looked at whether domestic workers' rights and contribution are recognized in the care policies, whether they're sufficiently rewarded, whether there's reduction of working hours. Redistribution is whether the state is doing enough to address the care needs. And lastly, it's about representation. So first of all, I think one main finding is that there is generally an exclusion of domestic workers from national labor laws, or even if they are not excluded, they are still denied of their full labor rights. So either it's outright exclusion, say in Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Thailand, or in South Korea and Taiwan, if you are domestic workers employed by individual households, then you're not protected under the national labor laws. Only if you're employed by companies, enterprises, then you will be protected. In Hong Kong, domestic workers are not specifically excluded from the labor ordinances, but then some rights are not available to domestic workers. Another issue that we identified is the fact that some laws and policies, say in the Philippines or Bangladesh, they have domestic workers laws that recognizes domestic work as work, or certain protections specifically to domestic workers. However, these laws are either have no binding power, or they introduce like a smaller minimum wage for domestic workers than other workers. So even if there are these laws, they are not actually providing equal protections for domestic workers. And so everyone would know, without sufficient protections, it leads to long working hours and heavy workload. And this is, I would say, exacerbated by the fact that a lot of domestic workers in the region do not have employment contracts, or for some like migrant domestic workers in Hong Kong, Taiwan, they have standard contracts, but in the standard contracts, they are afforded less protections. In general, there is no regulation on minimum work conditions like working hours. And so what it results in is, as we can see, some data from Bangladesh and Indonesia. In Bangladesh, domestic workers work over 79 hours per week. And then in Indonesia, it's over 50%, it's like 63% work like every day, and there's no break. In terms of reward, it's basically across the board that domestic workers are earning a lot less than other workers. In Bangladesh, many are living below the poverty line. In Indonesia, salary of domestic workers is generally only 20 to 30% of the regional minimum wage. And the Philippines is an example of like national laws for domestic workers not really providing protection for domestic workers, because they have a separate minimum wage for domestic workers, which is like less than half of the minimum wage for other workers in Metro Manila. When we think about recognition, we're also talking about recognition of care, the care needs of domestic workers. But in general, the trend is that any kind of social security protections or care support for workers is tied to formal employment. And as a result, like in Hong Kong and the Philippines, just as an example, domestic workers are not given social security protections because of their status and because they are in the informal economy. This is one interesting thing that we looked at. I think it's quite often neglected in other studies, is whether there is recognition of domestic workers' accumulation of skills and experience, because a lot of them do not like get certificates for doing domestic work. It's just unlike other care workers and working in institutions, but through years of experience, they accumulate skills that allows them to provide like better care work. So in terms of wage structure that recognizes domestic workers' accumulation of skills and experience across all these 8 countries, basically there is none except in Taiwan, where if migrant domestic caretakers work over 6 years, they can be recognized as intermediate skilled domestic caretakers. And that would lead to a higher wage requirement. But this is also dependent on the employer registering them as intermediate skilled domestic caretakers. And so if the employer doesn't do that, then still the domestic worker would not be able to enjoy this benefit. Finally, on representation, in general, domestic workers in the region do not have the right to freedom of association, unfortunately, except for Hong Kong and Malaysia. Sorry, not Malaysia, for Hong Kong and the Philippines, like they can form trade unions. But then as you can see, in Bangladesh and Taiwan and Thailand, sorry, the national labor laws specifically exclude domestic workers from the right to form trade unions and engage in collective bargaining, whereas in Indonesia and Malaysia, domestic workers associations cannot be registered or just are not recognized by the local governments. So that's it. I think it's quite a lot of information already in 20 minutes. And for more specific statistics, they will be available when the report is published. And I really hope that this research report can be helpful for the discussion. And I'm sure you'll be hearing a lot more from the panelists today on their own experience as caregivers and their views on the care agenda.
Thank you, Justine.
Yes, please, Saleha, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Justine, for your comprehensive presentations. Your insights have laid a strong foundation for our discussion today. We recognize the significance of voices of caregivers and shaping labor and care policies, and your work presenting this research is sort of instrumental to achieving this goal. So I would like to commend, like to commend the remarkable efforts of International Domestic Workers Federation for their commitment for organizing paid caregivers at the national, regional, and global scales, but also for coming up with the idea to commission the need for having research like this for base our future work on. So thank you. And now we would like to transition to the main event, our panel discussion. This conversation will bring together a few key experts and stakeholders to further explore the insights from the care mapping study. So moderating this insightful discussion will be Rania from IDWF. And I'll hand over back to you now, Rania, sorry.
Thank you, Saleha, so much. And thank you to Justine for presenting these facts and insights that we have gathered from the study. And some of these insights that have come up are something that the experts present today have already encountered in the kind of work that they are doing. And we shall be using this opportunity to kind of bridge the gap between the statistics and the insights presented today and the real world life experiences of the experts who have been working in domestic work and care work for many years now. So it would be my pleasure to introduce the panel who are with us right now. We have Sonia George, who is from SEWA, India, and she's the Vice President of SEWA, India, and she is also an IDWF Executive Committee member from Asia. Sonia, thank you for being with us here today. We also have Sernande, who's the Secretary of FADWU Hong Kong, and who's also the IDWF Executive Committee member from Asia. And she would be representing the voice of migrant domestic workers in this conversation. And then, of course, we have our old-time ally and very familiar face, Claire Hobden, who is the specialist in domestic work and other vulnerable work from the International Labour Organization. So let me just start this panel discussion by asking you, and you, Sonia, let me start with you. Since you've been listening to like the insights and the stats presented, based on these, can you actually share your personal experiences of working within the national context of India and how they may actually reflect the challenges and opportunities present within the care sector in the national context? Passing over to you, Sonia.
Thank you. Hope I'm audible, Anna. And thank you for bringing us together as part of the report launch on care in 8 countries in Asia. And once again, welcome all of you in the name of IDWF. And as the report, the care report has highlighted, it has highlighted very significant issues that the caregivers, the care workers in Asia are facing at different levels. So I think that is the case with India also, where with a high population and with a very high aging population. We also deal a lot with care as such, but at the same time, in most of the cases, domestic workers, they are not identified as care workers in that case, because one of the main issues that we deal with is that when you work inside a home, it's a very private space, and you are a worker in that private space, and that is a very closed space where there are no interaction possible with the public in that case. So I think within that space, domestic work, it could be termed as cooking food or cleaning the house, or those kinds of things are getting more prominent when we understand care work. But apart from that, looking at the more complexities of the care work in terms of looking after the sick, looking after the children, looking after the mothers, the postnatal situations, all such of very significant, and looking after the aged also within the families. It's mostly the responsibilities of domestic workers, because India, the care policies are very weak in that sense. The state is not providing care support to people at a larger level, and maybe you could see care when you need, you are quote unquote as orphans or destitutes or those kinds of things. The state may have public homes, otherwise there are no proper care facilities in terms of personal support or economic support or whatever is not available in a country. So that is where I think we have to highlight the kind of care work that is happening within the private homes, that as the report clearly shows, how it could be recognized as care work, and the recognition of the people who are involved in the care work, as it starts from when you look at India, the number of child domestic workers are more. That is a very significant thing that we have to talk about, because children from their age of 12 are engaged in domestic work, and they are involved in many such. Mostly children are involved in babysittings and taking care of the babies and all. So I think it's a very significant phenomena that when it comes to India, we have to talk about. It's once at all it's a child labor, and also the impact of gender on these labor relationships. It's very, very, very strong, and the vulnerability is increasing in terms of the privacy that spaces offers. The workplace means is demanding, and also the privacy, the invisibility of the worker. These are very important factors from the point of view of our country that we have to present when we talk about care and care policies. And that is very important, because it's denial of basic rights. And also in India, the situation is that home is not at all recognized as a workplace in most of the workspaces, and so people who are giving care within that home, they are not recognized in the public for as part of the care. We talk about public health workers, we talk about other forms of care that is available within the society, nurses or other forms of care that is available, but domestic workers are not mostly related in terms of care. And I think that is one of the important challenges that as a country India is facing when we talk about care economy and care policy from the perspective of caregivers as care workers. That is what I would like to present in the first phase. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank
You are muted, Raina.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Sonia, for the insights that you've given from the context of India and the fact that the work within the private space or within the home space is not recognized as work. And therefore, it is important to recognize work which is done within households as work and therefore consequently as care work as well. And it's interesting to note that you also mentioned the presence of child domestic workers who are shouldering a major portion of the care share. And the fact that the basic rights of domestic workers are being denied. And as we have seen with the policies that Justine has presented, that the focus has shifted more towards informal care, it is very essential to recognize home as the workplace to actually guarantee those rights to workers. Moving on to our next panelist, who is Jack. Jack, I actually wanted to know what unique challenges have you faced as migrant domestic workers in kind of recognition as a care workforce? And how is it that we can address these issues to ensure fair and equal treatment of migrant domestic workers in the care economy? Over to you, Jack.
Hi. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to have the voice to speak out regarding care economy. And as being 16 years of being a migrant domestic workers, there is really a lot of challenges that we are facing as a domestic worker. As we can see with the reports that Justine have shown it a while ago, there is really a lack of public investment in regards into care economy. So as you can see in the data, Hong Kong, Taiwan, they are all relying to migrant domestic workers because of low wages, because of being in a live-in condition, because of long working hours. Most of them are on call for 24 hours because they are in a live-in condition. So on my experience as a migrant domestic workers, as you can see, I am not just only holding household chores, but I had also experience to take care of a child at the same time, taking care of an elderly. So it is very significant to recognize that domestic work is really a care work, which had to be treated equally in regards into in a working situation. So the challenges in here is that we are lack of recognition. As what Justine had shown in the report, there's the 5 are that we are really lacking on it. But if we can see it economically and politically, we are distributing, migrant domestic workers are distributing a lot of effort, lot of services. It regards into care economy. So it regards into the situation. Of course, being as a migrant domestic workers, we want this to be, we want us to be treated equally in the society, as we had given a special role on this we say care work. It's not because it's not just only doing household chores. We are taking care of the family as it indicated in our contract. We are not only doing such individual things. And the most difficult here is here in Hong Kong, we cannot change work. When we say domestic work, that is already a package deal. You have to take care of a child, you have to take care of elderly. So in this factor, there's only one thing that we want is to be the recognition that domestic work is care work in order for us also to be dignified in the society. So being a migrant domestic worker, I could say that since there's a lack of public investment in barely catching up with this matter, they should also have this kind of plan on how they protect us, on how they give us such protection as a domestic worker. It regards into care economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. I think you raised some few very important points here. One is, of course, the fact that migrant domestic workers in contexts like Hong Kong, and to refer to Justine in the context of South Korea, Taiwan, and Malaysia, they are taking up a lot of the care work share that is in the country. And also, thank you for highlighting the importance of indirect and direct care work. The fact that domestic workers are doing direct care work in taking care of a person, whether it is elderly, child, or a disabled person, and also doing indirect care work, which is ancillary activities like cleaning, cooking, sharing, etc., that domestic workers are carrying up. So it's a completely whole package, and we appreciate that. Moving on to Claire Hobden from the ILO. Claire, we wanted to actually ask you if you could provide insights into how the research findings which have been presented by Justine relate to the global trends that you have shared or you have seen in laws and policies regarding care work, and what are the key takeaways that we can draw from the global and state level perspectives that we have presented in the research. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Raina. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to comment. I just wanted to start by really congratulating the team on this report, because to answer your question, Raina, right now, I would say that there is not really a strong trend, because it's still a topic and a subject and a theme that doesn't have a single definition, a single understanding. It's something that's still quite confusing to people in many places in the world. And so this report, I think, is a huge contribution towards clarifying what we mean when we talk about care and the role that domestic workers play in providing that care, and as workers who have also family responsibilities of their own that also need care policies to work at their service. So as usual, I think the IDWF here is ahead of the curve. In terms of trends, I would say, again, that the main trend is that there's not really an organization of care, but rather a disorganization of care. There are national care policies in some countries, as we've seen here, and in Latin America, there's certainly a growing understanding of what a national care policy is and what role it needs to play in the future of our human societies. I think most countries where there is an aging or aged population, particularly among the G7, for example, and among a lot of countries in Europe, for example, there is discussion and debate around care policies and how to meet those care policies. And in fact, in those countries, there is a lot of anxiety, I would say, about how to meet the care needs of the future. There is no homogeneous trend, though, as to how to meet those care needs. And I think the care spectrum that you referred to is a good illustration of where different countries are on that spectrum globally. Because then, as I was saying, you have sort of the G7 countries, Europe, Latin America, where you have a lot of debate. But then I think many countries in Africa, for example, the concept of care is hardly on the map. And so there is a disconnect, let's say, between the care policy agenda and the work that's happening on the ground. So that needs to still continue to grow. I also see that there's a trend in inclusion of domestic workers in labor laws globally. As some of you might remember, the ILO published a report in 2021 on progress made since the adoption of Convention 189, 10 years after the adoption. And the report found that, generally speaking, there is a trend towards including domestic workers in labor laws. But that trend looks very different depending on the country and on the region. And unfortunately, Asia is indeed a region in which the progress has been very slow, which I don't need to tell you all that. You are the ones who have been on the front lines fighting to be included. So there are still these huge gaps in Asia, but it was also interesting to see some good examples coming out of the research. And I think one thing that's particularly noteworthy is the way in which domestic workers who are working through service providers, through companies, are sometimes being covered by labor laws, whereas those who are working directly for the households are being excluded. So I think, there's room here to advocate further that they're doing the same work, and so they should be treated equally, whether they're employed by or paid for by a public service, a public entity, whether they're provided through a private enterprise, or whether they're hired directly by the household. They are performing largely the same work and therefore should be covered equally. And this, of course, is where the convention comes in, but I can speak about that later. So yes, so I think that from the report that you just shared, we see both some of the good practices or some examples of the directions in which we might go, and also a lot of the ongoing practices of exclusion that really need to be reversed. I think what we're also seeing, right, there's the segmentation of the workforce that really came out to me in the report. And also what the implications are for organizing. If the workforce is segmented across different types of labor protection rights and care regimes, then there certainly needs to be a coordination, I think, and a unionization if possible, but certainly a coordination or a uniting among those care workers who are working under different regimes. And I know that domestic workers have often led the way in creating these kinds of alliances. And then I just wanted to end with a note on skills, which I think it's also very interesting that most countries except Taiwan are not recognizing acquired skills and accumulated experience. That too, I'm afraid, is a trend across the world, although there are some countries where there are wage scales according to years of experience and certifications. This is often where there are unions of domestic workers and even organizations of employers where they've been able to negotiate these wage scales. But generally speaking, I also just wanted to point to a recent ILO report that my colleague who's on the call with us today, Rebecca, played a key role in, that shows that domestic workers are really working at a mid-skill level occupation. And that is really an internationally recognized classification of skills. So I really think that there's room to advocate more that domestic work is not low skilled, it's not unskilled, it is skilled work and should be recognized as such. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for your assertion that domestic work is skilled work. And this is something that we have been trying to get across to governments and decision-making bodies about the fact that domestic work is skilled work and needs to be recognized as care work as well. I would also like to thank you for drawing attention to the fact that workers, especially domestic workers, working within the same contexts and doing the same kind of work are completely compensated differently. If they are under companies, they're included in labor laws, but if they are included through direct hiring, they may not be included under the same labor laws that offer them protection. I think this is something interesting and something that we have also discovered in our study. And maybe we will have the opportunity for Justine to answer more questions around that. Again, like coming back to you, Sonia, my next question to you would be, in your view, what steps do you think can be taken to ensure that the perspectives and experiences of domestic workers are heard within the national context, and that they can play a central role in shaping care policies and enhancing working conditions within the national context? Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you. I think, see, when we talk about care and care economy, means now one of the positive things that we could see is that most of the countries are now taking care economy as one of their primary responsibility to bring into public attention and to create discussions and towards policies that each country facilitate in terms of addressing workers. So I think it is our responsibility at this time also, because in many of the countries we are on the process as domestic workers organizations working for the ratification of the Convention 189. So that is where domestic workers issues are also mainstreamed simultaneously in most of the countries following the Convention 189. So domestic workers are no more in that terms and not an invisible category of labor force in all over the world. Means they have become visibilized through our continuous. We are proud to say that through our domestic workers unions and organizations continued activities, our struggles and our resistance throughout different times. So that way domestic work is also on the forefront of trade unions, of employees organizations. So one example that I would like to bring to the notice is that it was a surprise for me that after I was discussing the issues of domestic workers in the Asia Pacific Regional Meeting of ILO, where Indian Employers Association president was also present, and he was hearing. Soon after that, he called and he said, "No, what would you really want as domestic workers organizations for domestic workers from employers, and let's have a meeting, then let it goes to a tripartite meeting." So I think things like that are significantly happening all over the world, and especially in our context also. So I think it's high time for us to connect these activities from a care perspective and from a rights perspective. I think that is very important, because mostly care policies, these are highly gendered. You know that, as the report says, more than 2/3 of the caregivers are women workers. It's important for us to highlight that point, the vulnerability, the patriarchal approach of policies that the governments take in most of the times, especially in terms of determining the recognition, decent work situations, like minimum wages, as Claire rightly pointed out, upgrading the skills, the existing skill concept itself, that is very important. We call it as professionalizing the skill of domestic workers, because apart from a domestic worker, or apart from a trained nurse, who is means or a doctor who is well versed in their services as part of their education, a domestic worker should be the one who has the skill to look after a fully bedridden person by herself, a one person looking after a fully bedridden person. And that is one of the most required services that the world is looking after at this age, and that only a domestic care worker can do. And I think these are the points, crucial points, where we are skills through the right perspective, and also trying to bring these while we address the care policies, and also measuring care in terms of contribution to the economy. That is very important. That is something that at this stage we have to focus, because most of the time we don't measure the time that they have given for care, the support they are giving for the rest of the economic activities. So measuring care in terms of time, in terms of economic contribution, in terms of physical and also emotional support that a care worker is offering to individual families, that is very important. And those are the things that domestic workers are really giving. So at this point, promote means pushing governments to measure the care work, so that they will be equally proportional to the professionalization, and also to the contribution to the economic sphere, and also to the larger socio-economic and cultural aspects of the society. I think that is very important for us to take into consideration, and that is where we have to really pressurize, focus our activities, and also to bring domestic workers together as care workers, while pushing ILO convention and also the care policy of each particular countries, bringing it to the international attention also. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sonia. You've raised some very pertinent points here about how the intersectionality of the rights framework needs to be looked at when it talks about the rights of care workers, particularly domestic workers. And the fact that you've shed light on the fact that 2/3 of care workers are women. And of course, like domestic workers are a highly feminized workforce. Therefore, the intersection of rights need to be looked at to guarantee them the entire gamut of rights that an individual and a worker is entitled to. Moving on from Sonia, we shall now be coming back to Jack again. Jack, my question to you is, what are the unique challenges that migrant domestic workers have faced? as part of the care workforce? And how is it that you think that we can address these issues so that there is fair and equal treatment of migrant domestic workers within the care sector? Over to you, Jack. Jack, you're on mute. Yes.
In order for us to go with these challenges or fight with these challenges that those domestic workers is encountering, mostly first maybe to legislate the wage protection. There should be such a protection for the wages, because we all know that most domestic workers had the lowest salary in the society, wherein they had the long working hours. And secondly, of course, the recognition of domestic work as care work, which is very important for us, because this is a dignity that will be given or provided to all of that they are recognizing our contribution to the society. Third is not everyone has a weekly day off, unlike Hong Kong. So it is very also important that all domestic workers should have the weekly day off or holidays, because this is the time that they could also relax. This is the time that they could also rest themselves for these long weekdays, long working hours every day in 6 days. So it is very important, though it was already put in the C189, but it is very important that there should be a weekly day off to every domestic workers. Next is the social protection, social security protection. Not all of us had been secured in this matter, wherein we are in a race work, because we had this kind of live-in condition. Most of us don't have even privacy. We are staying in a living room. We are staying in a space in the kitchen or in the bedroom. So in this matter, there should always be a social protection, which is for us, as we are working in the into this field. And since we had the long working hours, it is very also important that we should have a regulation on the standard working hours, because we are human. We are also getting tired. We are not a machine who could work for that long working hours. So it is very important to have this standard working hours for us. And of course, the last one is the representations of domestic worker in the care agenda. So because we have seen it already that there is no such political plan to be included domestic work as care work. So that is for me with my insight as a migrant domestic worker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. I think you've raised a few very pertinent points. And I would just like to draw the attention to one of the comments being made in the chat by one of our workers from United Philippines, who's saying that that governments are also obliged to set up a daycare or room in the workplace, but it is not included in the private sector. And therefore, one of the demands should be that there should be institutionalized care in the public and private sector, and that the government should provide the real daycare where the children of the domestic workers can be put as domestic workers get to work. So this is again a very specific demand that's been put forth by Himaya, our worker leader from United Philippines. Passing, the next question is addressed to you, Claire, and we wanted to actually know what strategies and best practices can unions employ to amplify worker perspectives and advocate for improvements in the care sector. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks a lot. I'll speak a little bit to some of the international labor standards and ILO instruments that can be used, as well as reports. I mean, I think, first of all, we all know that the main instrument for domestic workers is Convention 189. I thought it worth repeating that the scope of Convention 189 is large, very broad. It is not covering only domestic workers who are working directly for households. It's covering also those who are working through a service provider. It does not define who the employer is. So the employer can also be a private company or a public agency. The important part is that domestic workers are defined by the workplace, which is the home. So I think that's always worth repeating, because I think it might be clear among this group, but it is not clear among many policymakers. So it's something to keep in mind, particularly when talking about organizing or forming alliances with other types of workers who fall under the scope of Convention 189, who might not identify as domestic workers, who might not be defined as domestic workers under the law, but who are performing domestic work as we understand it in the convention. So that might be a way to create a common platform among different groups of workers who might otherwise be segmented and separated in the national context. Also, the convention, let's remember that the goal of the convention is to ensure equal rights for domestic workers, so equal to those of other workers. And in that respect, I think there are a lot of fundamental ILO conventions that probably could be of service, right? So the Convention 111 and 100 are fundamental conventions of the ILO that pertain to equality and non-discrimination. So even if your country has not ratified Convention 189, you can make use of these fundamental conventions, because all ILO member states should have ratified those conventions and are bound to put them into practice and apply them in their countries. In that sense, I also wanted to refer to the fact that the Occupational Safety and Health Conventions, C155 and C187, are now also fundamental conventions. And occupational safety and health are core concerns for domestic workers who are often excluded from occupational safety and health provisions. So also conventions that can be used in your advocacy work. Convention 87 and 98 goes without saying on freedom of association and collective bargaining. We heard it before that there are several countries in Asia where domestic workers are excluded. And the ILO mechanisms can be used also to submit complaints about the exclusion of domestic workers. So you should try to register to become a union and then submit a complaint once that registration request is rejected. And I know this has happened in some countries, notably Malaysia, where there's an ongoing case. So these are some of the different instruments that I think can be used. I also wanted to just remember that in Convention 189, there are specific provisions that make reference to the fact that domestic workers' organizations, where they exist, should also be consulted alongside the most representative organization of workers. So, of course, within the ILO universe, that means there's a coordination effort that should take place between the domestic workers' organizations and the trade union confederations, which clearly in a lot of countries remains a big challenge. But I think that is also one of the means through which more institutional power can be gained. And the ILO can support in this respect if ever there are challenges that come up. And then finally, I could not stop this conversation without mentioning next year's general discussion on care. We're very happy to have on the call with us also my colleague, Anna, who's working on the care report, on the background report towards that discussion. The discussion takes place in June. I can only encourage you all to speak to your governments ahead, and also the trade union confederations ahead of the general discussion, to make your platform clear, to make sure that the government goes into the general discussion knowing that domestic work is care work, and that they are shouldering a huge share of the responsibility, and that therefore they should be covered by these policies. I think that this report that you have published will be a huge contribution towards that advocacy effort. I hope that the background report that the ILO will be publishing in the next months will also be of service. And in general, that the other ILO reports and instruments and colleagues can also support you. So please do not hesitate to contact us if you have questions or requests for support that we can possibly help on. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for raising and showing and shedding light on those important conventions that can be used outside of C189 to actually realize the rights of domestic workers. And we would also like to thank you for shedding light on the fact that the ILC 2024 is going to focus on care work. And therefore, the domestic worker leaders here, the allies here, have a lot of work to kind of substantiate the demands that we have for ILC 2024, as well as letting government representatives know the domestic work is care work. So thank you for that, Claire. We should now be moving on to a few question and answers that we have gathered over the chat. Two of the questions are actually directly addressed to the researcher, which is Justin. And Justin, if you can just take like a minute or two to answer this. So one of the questions was that, is there any other way that countries recognize skills of domestic workers other than years of working experience, as mentioned in Taiwan? And whether if the research covers any bilateral agreements between the country of origin and the country of destination while looking at the rights narrative at the country of destination. Justin, over to you.
First of all, thank you for the question. So to the first question on accumulation of skills and experience, well, Taiwan is the only example we have of all the countries that we looked at. And I think perhaps years of experience might be the best way of looking at accumulation of skills from what I'm seeing, mainly because if we require like certification, some discussions came up when I was working with the national researchers, is that it's also reflected from some of the people that were interviewed. It adds additional costs for domestic workers to get the increased wages or better pay that they deserve. Like and for say local care workers also, if they need to get a certificate, they might need to travel to certain training centers and then pay certain administrative fees in order to get these certifications. So that may not be a good way of showing whether a domestic worker or a caregiver has the skills and experience for better pay. So I think in terms of wage structure, years of experience is definitely one way of doing it. But I'd say a way of not doing it is to introduce like formal requirements for trainings that would just introduce more costs for domestic workers. So for the second question, we didn't look at the agreements themselves, but for destination countries like Malaysia, Taiwan, and Hong Kong, we did have like extensive findings on the situation of migrant domestic workers, because they are actually the majority of domestic workers in the destination countries. And in Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, there are standard employment contracts that would bind the migrant domestic workers on their wages and any employment rights that they enjoy. And we can see from all these three places that the terms are different and introduce less protections than what every other employee enjoy under the national labor laws. So that is the standard employment contract is definitely part of the bilateral agreements in order for these destination countries to accept incoming migrant workers. So that is definitely one thing that needs to be addressed. And another thing I think Jack mentioned as well, for part of this is also the labor migration policy that that comes together with the labor policies on who provides care in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Malaysia, for example. And taking Taiwan as an example, it's very clear from what we found that the government is trying to turn a blind eye to the fact that migrant domestic workers are also care workers, because they're basically separating the labor migration policy from their own care policies, and they're unwilling to put them together and look at it as a whole. So I hope these answers your questions. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine, for taking the time to answer those questions. We are now opening up the floor for more questions. So in case there are any questions, like, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up, or please feel free to type the question in the chat. Please feel free to ask anything that you want of the panelists. In case there are no more questions, there is a question from Sheila, who is from Penang Central. Sheila, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Thank you very much, Raina, and good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I just want to ask, after this study of IDWF, what will be our next action for campaign, and how do we campaign this? Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Maybe we can take one more question from Grace. Grace, if you'd like to go ahead.
Hi, yes, thank you so much to everyone for such an insightful time. I was curious, for those who are on the panel who are working on the ground or more closely with domestic workers, if you've seen technology changing the experience of domestic workers in your home countries. And this could be maybe labor-saving technologies like vacuum cleaners or washing machines, or things like smartphones. So if technology has come up at all in your work, and how that's shifting the way that domestic work is experienced.
Thank you so much. And there are two more questions in the chat, but probably we will come to that. Maybe we can start with the technology question, and I would ask Sonia and Claire to give their insights on this, please.
Yeah, it's true that technology is being taken over at some places in terms of especially this indirect care services, indirect domestic work, that indirect care that we are talking about. It means coming up to a certain extent, but at the same time, we can see that the care workers are not, or the domestic workers, they're what you call their relevance or demand has not been decreased anywhere in terms of that. That is, means many of the places that we have been looking closely whether this has replaced any domestic workers, or the demand or the need for the domestic workers. I think it's not the situation. So that is something that and we have more demands from the domestic workers, employers, or the clients, or the service providers, saying that the domestic workers could be more equipped to use these modern gadgets, and the demands increases from there, and even the professional skills to manage these gadgets, so that they can be more professional and in quality wise they could be more approachable. That is something that where we could demand more money, more wages for the domestic workers as part of our collectivization. That is what we have been seeing. And another thing is that platform, that is something that has been increasing. The service providers, especially the platform service providers, are increasing at different levels, especially hiring the service of domestic workers. And I think many domestic workers have been hired through those platforms where they are linked only through technology and technological algorithms that that control the work. And that is where somewhere we find that again the need of collectivization, how that spirit of collectivization is losing when these varied experiences of platformization is scattering domestic workers, their unionization, the possibilities of coming together at that level. That we have to think very seriously, means, because how do we look at technology at that level is very important, very serious and crucial for us at this level, because already it's a very scattered labor force and no very individual oriented labor force, and so bringing them together, this is what our experience for these many years of collectivizing domestic workers. Always the employers or the service providers to scatter them as much as possible when any forms of collectivization come. So I think organizations like us, especially SEWA, we have formed our own forms of collectivization where we could find our own platforms so that domestic workers find work through the collective themselves. That is one of the kind of positive aspects that have come out in order to resist these tendencies of what you call the technology to keep away workers' rights and the challenges that workers face in terms of wages, in terms of social security, and in terms of taking care of their other personal needs as women and as workers. So I think these things we have to really take up even in our discussion, so that we should not carry away by the increasing technologization or the platform that may offer work in that sense. But I think collectivization is one of the crucial aspects that we have to think here again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia, for your stress on collectivization. And Claire, if I may just give you the floor to answer this.
Sure, I can be brief. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any systematic research yet on the role of technology in the domestic work sector. However, there are, I would say, in 2 or 3 different respects, a role that technology is playing with some documentation of these effects. On the one hand, yes, there's the items like the vacuum cleaner and the technology that helps with indirect care that's been around for a little while. I think we've also seen to some degree on the direct care that there are increasingly robots or AI or different types of applications of technology that can provide what seems like company to people who are otherwise alone. Or who feel alone. And then I think there's the technologies that also enable people to age at home, which is sort of a larger technology that might be more related to the type of bed that you have, if you can lift out of bed, and other types of quasi-medical type of devices that you need at home. And then finally, there's everything related to digital platforms, which are also technology, which are helping to place domestic workers with varying effects, sometimes negative, sometimes positive, on the wages of domestic workers, the working conditions, the security, etc. And I think ultimately, yes, there needs to be more research in this area to better understand and anticipate. We find that, generally speaking, domestic work is a sector that won't be replaced by technology in the future, but I do think that it will transform the sector in some respects. And I know that looking at it from the employer's perspective, if you will, from the household's perspective, particularly from an elder care perspective, There are also technologies that are considered to be sort of helping older persons age at home that we don't necessarily see in the context of domestic work, but for example, the delivery services, the sort of TaskRabbit type of platforms, things that help these people perform tasks that they might not be able to do themselves, might also somehow play a role in domestic work, potentially on reducing workload, but most likely in terms of making their work a little bit more precarious. So I think these are different angles that should be looked at, and I would just warmly encourage more research on the topic.
Thank you, Claire, for highlighting the fact that the nature and the quality of care work can consistently change with the application of technology, and the fact that domestic work is not the scope of work that is looked to be automated right away. And therefore, there is scope for workers and technology to come together to improve the sector. And the question regarding what IDWF is planning to do with the research, maybe that's something that IDWF can take up and I can take 2 minutes to answer. So we are planning to use this research as well as some of the case studies that we shall be reaching out to all of our affiliates. The plan is to take the case studies and the data together to come up with a platform of demands for the ILC 2024 that Claire was talking about. Claire had made a request that we should be using this time to formalize our demands. And this is exactly what we shall be doing with the results of the research that we have and some conversations about care, how care advocacy is happening across different contexts within Asia. We unfortunately do not have the time for more questions because we have to end. For the other questions being asked by the participants, we shall be reaching out to you via mail. We shall be sending these questions to the panelists, and we shall be asking them to give their thoughts and opinions on these questions, and we shall be sending them to you. For now, I would like to pass it over to Fish, the regional coordinator for Asia at IDWF, to give us the closing.
Thank you so much, everybody. We have many participants today for joining. Many domestic workers joined as well. I hope through this process, we can build the awareness of the domestic workers, how important of our work in building, contributing to the care economy and to the society. Really special thanks, big thanks to our partner organization, Oxfam, Asia, especially Saleha and the team, the Asia Feminist Coalition, who also helped in the process building up to share our information, to reach out to more groups so that we can build more alliance in our struggles and advocacy. So thank you, everybody. Thanks our panelists, Sonia, George, and Jack, the 2 newly elected IDWF Executive Committee members, Claire Hobden, our longtime support, who are always helpful for us whenever we ask any questions, and whenever we need questions, we need information, she's always with us to provide help from the IO. Thank you so much. So now is our homework and assignment for everybody here. As we have heard how the care policy looks like in the region, it is big gap. There is a lack of attention and surveys to the general public on the care, and also the care needs of the domestic workers are ignored and neglected. And most important of all, while the domestic workers are shared the big, and in some countries the biggest share of the care, but our rights are neglected. So we really have to fight for the rights and highlight and shape our demand and advocacy on how domestic workers are workers, and domestic workers are the major workforce in the care economy, and it cannot be neglected. Thank you very much for joining. We will certainly share the PPT, the PowerPoint presentation to all of you. Special thanks to Justin with many work despite you have a busy schedule. So, and we will also share the recordings, voice recordings. And actually, as a follow-up, we will also have a blog post, and we will do some story writing of the domestic worker situation. And now we only have 8 economies that we have done some small research on the care policy. We will do more for more countries. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you everybody have a good day and have a good late evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Vanakkam.
Oh, bye.
Hi, Reina. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye.
Bye, bye, goodbye. Hi, Justin. Hi, Fish.